This is one of those hearings where I think I am going to know less coming out of this hearing than I did when I walked in, because of the obfuscation and the dancing around that we're all doing here. Matter of fact,
$529 billion. $529 billion is how much the federal government has spent on IT since 2008.
Well, you have completely and utterly failed in that mission if that was your objective. The Inspector General has been warning about this since 2007. The information was vulnerable, and the hackers got it.
22 million people didn't lose their passwords. They lost their lives on paper. Every address they had ever lived at, every employer, every foreign contact, financial problems, drug use, mental health treatment, family members, personal vulnerabilities, the names of people who could verify their character, and the names of people who might betray them. This wasn't identity theft. This was intelligence gold. June 2015. The United States Office of Personnel Management announces what sounds like a routine data breach. Most Americans have never heard of it. It is not the Pentagon. It is not the CIA. It is the federal government's Human Resources Department, the agency responsible for processing security clearances and for storing the background investigation files of intelligence officers, defense contractors, and federal employees. What was stolen is called Standard Form 86, a form more than 100 pages long, documenting 15 years of a person's life, and required of anyone seeking a United States security clearance. Millions of background investigation files dating back years were inside these databases. And those databases were indefensible. For years, the agency's own Inspector General had issued warnings.
When I began my tenure as the director of OPM, one of my first priorities was to develop an IT strategic plan and to develop the important pillar of cybersecurity within our systems. We have worked very hard since that time, and as we update these legacy systems, it's important that we recognize that there is a persistent and aggressive effort on the part of these actors to not only intrude in our system, but systems throughout government and indeed in the private sector.
Well, you have completely and utterly failed in that mission if that was your objective. The Inspector General has been warning about this since 2007. There have been breach after breach. He recommended shutting it down last year, and you made a conscious decision to not do that. You kept it open, the information was vulnerable, and the hackers got it. I don't know if it's the Chinese, the Russians, or wherever else, but they've got it. And they're going to prey upon the American people. That's their goal and objective. And you made a conscious decision to leave that information vulnerable. It was
outdated systems, weak access controls. Social security numbers were stored without encryption. No two-factor authentication protected the crown jewels of American national security. The warnings were documented. They were delivered. They were ignored. Somewhere inside those fragile systems, someone was already watching. Patient, resourceful, disciplined, not a criminal looking for credit card numbers. A foreign intelligence service was running a long-term operation against the heart of the American security apparatus. By the time the breach was discovered, the attackers had already been inside for more than a year. The public did not know. Congress did not know. Even the agency itself did not know. The vault door was not cracked open. It had been standing open for months, and the intruders were still inside. They did not steal anything at first. That would have triggered alarms. Instead, they learned. November 2013. While Americans prepare for Thanksgiving, attackers quietly enter the network. They do not touch personnel files. They study the environment. They map servers. They gather architecture documents. They learn exactly how the system is built and exactly where its weaknesses are. Suspicious activity is detected months later. Officials believe they have contained it. They have not.
Does it include military personnel?
As I said, this is an...
This is a yes/no question. Does it include military personnel?
I would be glad to discuss that in a classified setting.
Does it include contractor information?
Again, I would be glad to discuss that in a classified setting.
There's nothing classified as to what information this includes.
The attackers have already moved beyond the agency itself. They compromised 2 contractors authorized to conduct government background investigations. These companies hold legitimate credentials to access the most sensitive databases. The attackers take those credentials. In May 2014, a second intrusion begins, using valid usernames and passwords belonging to real employees. Every monitoring tool registers nothing unusual. To every system in place, it looks like an authorized user logging in at the start of a workday. Meanwhile, a piece of malware called PlugX quietly establishes itself inside the network. Disguised as a legitimate system file, it begins communicating with external command servers. Infrastructure tied to the attack was registered under names drawn from Marvel superheroes: Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, Captain America, and Iron Man. They are not hiding. They are operating in plain sight, and they are escalating. By mid-2014, the attackers escalated privileges through Active Directory weaknesses, gaining administrative control over the network's domain controllers. Once you own the domain controllers, you own the network. Every system, every database, every file. They access the clearance database. Millions of background investigations are compressed and exfiltrated in encrypted batches. Psychological assessments, financial histories, medical disclosures, investigators' handwritten notes on interviews conducted in living rooms across America. For months, terabytes of data flow outward. No alarms, no emergency response, no public warning. The breach expands, basic personnel records, payroll data, and then 5.6 million fingerprint files, biometric identifiers that cannot be changed. Not in 5 years, not in 50 years. And then there were the foreign contacts. Every clearance form required applicants to list friends, colleagues, and acquaintances abroad. For a foreign intelligence service, it was a ready-made map of potential targets, a guide to every person around the world who might be approached, pressured, or turned against the people they knew. In January 2015, 2-factor authentication was finally implemented. The attackers had been inside for over a year. It was too late. 3 months later, a security researcher noticed suspicious outbound network traffic connected to that disguised file. The facade collapsed. An outside cybersecurity firm was called in. What they found was worse than anyone imagined. This was not a smash and grab. This was a sustained surgical intelligence operation, and it had worked perfectly. When the government finally counted the damage, the number kept growing, and growing, and growing. New detection software is deployed across thousands of machines, multiple attacker groups, thousands of malicious artifacts scattered throughout the system, widespread infection at every level of the infrastructure. When the agency goes public in June, the announcement is carefully limited. 4.2 million records were compromised, basic personnel information, names, and social security numbers. 8 days later, the second announcement comes. The security clearance database had also been breached. Not 4 million records, but 18 million. And then the full scope emerges. 22.1 million individuals affected. 19.7 million background investigation applicants. 1.8 million non-applicants, spouses, partners, cohabitants whose information appeared in clearance forms. 5.6 million fingerprint records belonging to people who had done nothing more than apply to serve their country. Congressional hearings follow immediately. Lawmakers cite years of Inspector General reports describing persistent systemic failures.
Held hearings where it showed that federal agencies couldn't procure, implement, or deploy IT systems without massive bugs or massive cost overruns. We've held hearings where at least one federal agency, in this case the FBI, had a fundamental misunderstanding of technology where they continue to believe they can put in backdoors to encryption systems just for the good guys and not for hackers, which you cannot do. We had over 10 federal data system breaches last year. So there is a culture problem, and there is a problem of civilian leadership not understanding we're in a cyber war. Every day, so let me give you some examples of this culture problem. You've heard today there was unencrypted Social Security numbers. That's just not acceptable. That is a failure of leadership. Look at the various IG reports over the years showing material weaknesses, and then look at last year's IG report, page 12. It says, as of November of last year, OPM had not yet done a risk assessment. That is ridiculous, especially since you knew in March your system was breached. That is a failure of leadership.
Encryption had been recommended and delayed. Access controls had been criticized repeatedly. Shared administrative accounts had been flagged as dangerous year after year. One explanation, delivered under oath, stops the room cold. The systems were described as too old to support encryption. The agency responsible for determining who could be trusted with America's most sensitive secrets had been physically incapable of protecting those secrets once collected. The FBI director calls it a very big deal from both national security and counterintelligence perspectives. Foreign intelligence services now hold detailed vulnerability profiles on nearly every cleared American federal employee. Undercover deployments are reassessed. Risk models are recalculated. Officers with overseas exposure are reviewed one by one. The damage cannot be undone. The agency director resigns. Resignations do not retrieve stolen data. Evidence, including malware signatures, infrastructure patterns, and operational tradecraft, points toward Chinese state-sponsored actors. Senior United States officials later confirm China was responsible. A Chinese national arrested in Los Angeles was linked to malware used in operations connected to the breach. The data is in foreign databases. The fingerprints are filed. The foreign contacts are cataloged. And the people whose lives were exposed have no way to take any of it back. In 2016, Congress published a 241-page report on the breach. Its conclusion is brutal and simple.
All right, so what exactly did DHS and the FBI discover?
Well, what they found, and one of the biggest deals in the report, is that they identified kind of a lax culture when it comes to information security. There weren't, software wasn't patched according to schedule, dual-factor authentication wasn't used the way it should be, and people didn't have segmented access to the networks. This was a problem especially for people who were teleworking, logging in perhaps from their homes. They had access to a whole range of information that perhaps they should not have given their circumstances. In the middle of a very large push towards implementing two-factor authentication across all agencies. Two-factor authentication just means using an additional, usually a physical credential to complement your username and password. And that way, if somebody does obtain your username and password, they still can't log into the network and get information without the card.
Officials were asked earlier why they didn't encrypt the information, and the response was it is not feasible to implement on networks that are too old. Members of Congress were also told cybersecurity problems are decades in the making.
This was preventable. Every failure documented in that report had been warned about in advance. Encryption was delayed for years. Two-factor authentication was implemented too late. Network segmentation was inadequate. Contractor access was insufficiently monitored. Shared administrative credentials remained active despite more than a decade of warnings. The attack succeeded not because the adversary was unstoppable. It succeeded because the defenses were neglected, systematically, bureaucratically, year after year, until there was effectively nothing left to breach. Think about what this agency was built to do. Its entire mission was to determine who could be trusted with the nation's secrets. It conducted exhaustive investigations into the personal lives of millions of people, specifically to identify vulnerabilities that a foreign adversary might exploit. And then it stored every one of those vulnerability assessments in systems it had been told, repeatedly, were indefensible. The fingerprints cannot expire. Social security numbers cannot be changed. Life histories cannot be reset. People who held undercover roles, people with foreign family members, people who disclosed addiction struggles or financial hardship in confidence to their government, all of that information ended up permanently in foreign hands. The congressional report estimated the intelligence damage could persist for more than 40 years. 40 years of compromised sources. 40 years of recruitments that will never happen because a foreign service already knows exactly which American official is in financial trouble, which analyst has family abroad, and which contractor is vulnerable to approach. This breach will outlive the careers of every official who failed to prevent it. So what does this actually teach us? 4. And none of them are complicated. Warnings are not optional. When an inspector general flags the same vulnerability across multiple annual reports, that is not bureaucratic paperwork. It is a countdown. Encryption is not a luxury. Storing tens of millions of sensitive government records without encryption was not a resource constraint. It was a choice, and the consequences of that choice are generational. Access is the attack surface. The attackers did not defeat sophisticated technical defenses. They obtained valid credentials through contractors, walked through the front door, and spent more than a year removing everything of value. The most dangerous vulnerabilities in any organization are not in the firewall. They are in credential management, third-party access, and the assumption that authorized-looking behavior is authorized behavior. And the adversary is patient. State-sponsored actors do not rush. They study, they map, they establish persistence, they escalate slowly, and they stay until they have everything they came for, or until they are found. This agency existed to protect America's secrets by knowing everything about the people trusted to keep them. Instead, it handed that knowledge, complete, organized, and verified, to a foreign intelligence service. 22 million people trusted their government with the most sensitive details of their lives. In cybersecurity, the greatest vulnerability is not always technical. It is the assumption that warnings can wait, and the discovery, always too late, that they cannot. The vault door was open for more than a year. The data is gone. And somewhere in a foreign intelligence archive, one of the most detailed databases ever assembled on American government personnel is still being read. The invisible heist is complete.